Basil Hayden's. Walk into any upscale restaurant and you'll find Basil Hayden sitting proudly on the top shelf. That tall bottle with the signature metal band screams sophistication. The wraparound label tells stories of old Hayden's high rye recipe. At $60 to $75, this is the bourbon people order when they want to seem knowledgeable without actually knowing anything. Here's what Beam Suntory doesn't advertise. Basil Hayden's is bottled at 80 proof. That's 40% alcohol by volume. That's not craft. That's legally the minimum for straight bourbon. Every other serious bourbon on the shelf hits 90 proof or higher. This delivers less flavor, less body, and less character than bottles costing $30 less. The high rye mash bill promises spice and complexity. What you actually get is watered-down grain alcohol with faint caramel notes that disappear before you swallow. The finish is non-existent. The mouthfeel is thin. Everything about this whiskey screams, designed for people who don't actually like bourbon's boldness. Industry analysts estimate production costs for standard bourbon around $12 to $18 per bottle. Basil Hayden's charges $60. That $42 gap represents pure packaging and positioning. You're funding the metal band, the premium shelf placement, and Beam Suntory's calculation that smoothness sells better than substance. But at least Basil Hayden's is technically bourbon. The next bottle barely qualifies. I.W. Harper, 15-year. I.W. Harper disappeared from American shelves in 1990s, living on only in export markets. Then Diageo resurrected it in 2015 as a premium 15-year expression, slapped a $70 to $90 price tag on it, and hoped nobody would question why a forgotten brand suddenly commanded luxury pricing. The whiskey itself is fine. 15 years in barrel delivers oak, vanilla, and gentle spice. But here's the problem. This is orphaned Stitzel-Weller stock that Diageo discovered gathering dust in warehouses. They didn't craft this bourbon. They inherited it, repackaged it, and marketed it as premium discovery. What frustrates informed drinkers is the cynicism. Diageo owns dozens of bourbon brands. They could have released this under any established label. Instead, they revived a dead name, created artificial heritage marketing, and charged premium prices for whiskey they stumbled upon, rather than intentionally produced. The packaging is beautiful. The 15-year age statement impresses casual buyers. But you're paying $70 to $90 for Diageo's warehouse cleanout dressed in luxury presentation. That's not bourbon appreciation. That's inventory management disguised as craft whiskey. And speaking of disguised mediocrity, the next brand weaponized storytelling. Jefferson's Ocean. Jefferson's Ocean aged at sea. Barrels traveled on ships crossing the equator. Temperature fluctuations and ocean motion supposedly created unique complexity. The story sounds incredible. The science is questionable. The price at $80 to $110 is pure fantasy. This is bourbon marketing at its most theatrical. The concept works brilliantly for Instagram posts. Customers imagine barrels rocking on waves, absorbing salt air, developing character through adventure. Reality is less romantic. Blind tastings consistently show minimal difference between Ocean and standard Jefferson's expressions. What you're tasting is mostly standard bourbon with slight caramel and vanilla notes that gentle heat cycling might contribute. But here's what really bothers industry veterans. Jefferson's doesn't distill their own bourbon. They source from undisclosed Kentucky producers, bottle it, and sell stories instead of provenance. Ocean takes that model to extremes. You're paying $80 to $110 for sourced bourbon that took a boat ride, then got marked up 70% for the nautical narrative. The secondary market for Ocean releases proves people buy stories more than liquid. Certain voyage editions sell for double retail, not because the whiskey improved, because the marketing got more creative. When you're paying for storytelling instead of distillation, you're not buying bourbon, you're buying branded theater. If Jefferson sells adventure, the next brand sells nostalgia it doesn't deserve. Bulleit & Bow. Bulleit & Bow launched in 2015 with romantic stories about resurrecting the legendary Stitzel-Weller distillery. The packaging is gorgeous, the bottle feels substantial, the presentation screams heritage and craft. At $50 to $65, this positions itself as premium bourbon deserving serious attention. Then you taste it and realize you just paid luxury prices for sourced bourbon with minimal Stitzel-Weller juice, if any. Diageo owns the trademark and the old distillery property, but the liquid inside comes from their broader Kentucky stocks. The Solera aging system they tout sounds sophisticated. What it actually means is continuously blending young bourbon into older stocks, stretching the good stuff across maximum volume. The flavor delivers mild caramel, light spice, and oak that fades quickly. Nothing here distinguishes it from $40 bourbons. You're paying $25 extra for the Stitzel-Weller mythology and beautiful packaging. Industry estimates put Diageo's cost around $15 per bottle. The $35 to $50 markup funds their luxury positioning strategy, not better bourbon. Blade and Bow represents corporate bourbon strategy perfectly. Buy legendary names, create heritage marketing around them, charge premium prices, and hope consumers confuse nostalgia with quality. Don't fall for it. And heritage exploitation only gets more aggressive from here. Rhetoric aged 25 years. Diageo's Orphan Barrel series launched as limited releases of forgotten whiskey discovered in warehouses. Rhetoric took this concept further, releasing sequential age statements of the same bourbon batch. First came 20 years, then 21, eventually reaching 25 years. Each release commanded $120 to $160. Here's the truth about ultra-aged bourbon. After 15 years, diminishing returns kick in hard. The oak dominates. The sweetness fades. What you're drinking is increasingly wood-flavored grain alcohol. Rhetoric at 25 years tastes over-oaked, tannic, and unbalanced. Whiskey experts openly question whether anyone actually enjoys drinking it or just enjoys owning it. But Diageo understands collector psychology. Each subsequent age statement creates artificial scarcity. Completionists chase the series. Secondary markets explode. Meanwhile, the liquid itself gets progressively worse as oak extraction overwhelms the base bourbon's character. Production costs for 25-year bourbon might reach $40 to $60 per bottle, accounting for Angel's share losses. Diageo charges $140. That $80 gap represents collector tax. You're funding their limited release machinery, not experiencing bourbon at its peak. When a bottle's best quality is its age statement rather than its flavor, something went wrong. Speaking of things going wrong, the next brand turned a gimmick into gospel. Woodford Reserve Double Oaked. Woodford Reserve's standard expression is a competent, slightly overpriced bourbon at $45 to $55. Then they created Double Oaked, finishing already aged bourbon in second heavily toasted barrels and charged $60 to $75 for the privilege. That $20 to $25 upcharge for a secondary barrel finish represents questionable value at best. The concept sounds premium. Double maturation promises added complexity. What you actually get is bourbon that tastes like you're chewing on charred wood. The toasted barrel finish dominates everything. Vanilla and caramel get buried under aggressive oak tannins. The balance that makes bourbon enjoyable completely disappears. What frustrates critics is how Double Oaked became Woodford's flagship despite being objectively worse than their standard expression. Brown-Forman successfully marketed more as better. More oak, more process, more price. The reality is that competent bourbon got ruined by unnecessary finishing, then sold at premium markup to people who confused complexity with quality. Industry insiders estimate the additional barrel finish adds maybe $5 to $8 in production costs. Brown-Forman charges $25 more at retail. That's a 300% markup on a process that makes the bourbon worse. You're paying extra to ruin perfectly good whiskey. But at least Double Oaked uses real Woodford bourbon. The next brand barely produces their own. High West Double Rye. High West built their brand on sourcing and blending whiskey, then marketing it as craft. Double Rye blends 2-year and 16-year rye into something that supposedly achieves unique balance. At $35 to $45, this costs more than most quality ryes while delivering less. Here's what the beautiful label doesn't tell you. The blend is dominated by young MGP rye from Indiana. That 16-year component contributes barely enough to justify mentioning. What you taste is aggressive, barely aged rye with raw grain bite and minimal complexity. The youth shows immediately. The finish is hot and sharp. High West's parent company Constellation Brands acquired them in 2016. Since then, prices climbed while transparency declined. The whiskey didn't improve, the marketing budget did. That Park City, Utah imagery sells mountain authenticity, while masking that most liquid inside comes from industrial Indiana production. Blind tastings consistently rank Double Rye below Rittenhouse and Old Forester Rye, both costing $20 to $25. You're paying $10 to $20 extra for craft positioning that doesn't reflect production reality. When packaging and location matter more than provenance, consumers get played. And if High West plays fast with sourcing truth, the next brand invented fiction entirely. Angel's Envy Bourbon. Angel's Envy launched with a compelling story. Lincoln Henderson, legendary Brown-Forman master distiller, creates his dream bourbon after retirement. Port wine barrel finishing adds unique character, beautiful copper bottle, touching heritage narrative. At $45 to $55, this should deliver exceptional bourbon. Instead, you get dessert wine masquerading as whiskey. The port finish dominates everything. You don't taste bourbon with subtle wine influence. You taste grape juice and caramel with bourbon somewhere in the background. The sweetness is cloying. The finish coats your mouth like syrup. For bourbon enthusiasts who appreciate oak, char, and grain complexity, this is fundamentally broken. What bothers critics most is watching Angel's Envy succeed despite being objectively unbalanced. Bacardi acquired the brand in 2023 for reported $400 million. That valuation didn't come from whiskey quality. It came from social media performance and gift market dominance. Angels envy photographs beautifully. It tastes like candy. Neither quality justifies $45 to $55 pricing. Industry estimates put production costs around $15 to $20 per bottle. The $25 to $35 markup funds the luxury positioning and Bacardi's acquisition debt. You're subsidizing corporate deal-making while drinking bourbon that prioritizes Instagram aesthetics over actual flavor balance. But Angel's Envy's sweetness is strategic calculation. The next brand's pricing is pure madness. WhistlePig Boss Hog. WhistlePig's standard 10-year rye costs $70 to $85 for Canadian-sourced whiskey bottled in Vermont. Their Boss Hog series takes that same questionable value proposition and multiplies it by insanity. These limited annual releases command $300 to $600 for finished rye that doesn't justify triple-digit pricing, let alone the cost of used luxury cars. Each Boss Hog release features different barrel finishes: rum casks, cognac barrels, Armagnac cooperage. The finishes sound exotic. What they actually accomplish is masking young, hot rye behind aggressive secondary flavors. When your base spirit needs that much finishing to be interesting, something's wrong with your base spirit. What drives bourbon communities crazy is watching collectors treat Boss Hog like investment vehicles. Secondary markets reach $1,000. People buy bottles they'll never open. The whiskey becomes purely speculative commodity divorced from actual drinking experience. WhistlePig happily fuels this insanity with increasingly theatrical releases and absurd price points. Production costs for finished rye, even at these age statements, might reach $60 to $90 per bottle. WhistlePig charges $500. That $410 gap represents pure hype tax. You're funding their calculated scarcity strategy and luxury brand positioning, not experiencing whiskey-worth vintage Scotch pricing. If WhistlePig represents rye's pricing madness, the next bourbon shows how allocation corrupts everything. Knob Creek 12-year. Knob Creek's standard 9-year expression is solid 100-proof bourbon at $35 to $40. Then Beam Suntory decided to create a 12-year version, make it allocated, charge $60 to $75, and watch consumers fight over incremental improvement that doesn't justify doubling the price. The flavor offers deeper oak and slightly more complexity than the 9-year. That's it. 3 additional years in barrel contribute maybe 15% more character while demanding 100% more money. Beam Suntory knows this. They also know that age statements and allocation create artificial demand regardless of value proposition. What frustrates bourbon drinkers is the allocation game. Knob Creek 12 isn't rare because production is limited. It's rare because Beam Suntory deliberately restricts distribution to create scarcity. Stores hold it for preferred customers. Prices climb on secondary markets. Meanwhile, the 9-year expression sits ignored despite being 90% as good for half the cost. When you buy Knob Creek 12, you're paying $40 extra for 3 years of oak and the satisfaction of obtaining allocated bourbon. That's not whiskey appreciation. That's participating in manufactured scarcity theater designed to maximize Beam Suntory's margins while training consumers to chase limited releases. And if Knob Creek's allocation seems calculated, the next brand turned it into religion. Maker's Mark Cheddar de Smeet Seishi. Maker's Mark built their reputation on wheated bourbon with that iconic red wax seal. Solid, approachable bourbon at $28 to $35. Then they created 46, inserting toasted French oak staves into barrels for additional aging, and charged $40 to $50 for this gimmick. That $15 to $20 upcharge for wooden sticks represents questionable innovation. The staves add oak spice and vanilla intensity. They also make the bourbon taste over-oaked and unbalanced compared to standard makers. The process isn't craft, it's compensation for not having older stocks to blend. Makers inserted wood to fake additional aging without waiting additional years. That's efficiency, not quality. What bothers critics is how Maker's Mark marketed this wood stave process as groundbreaking innovation. They call it wood finishing. What it actually represents is accelerated oak extraction achieved through increased wood surface area. It's a shortcut sold as craftsmanship. Beam Suntory charges premium prices for bourbon that skipped patient maturation. Production costs for 46 might exceed standard makers by $3 to $5, accounting for the French oak staves. Beam charges 15 to 20 more at retail. That's a 300% markup on a process designed to save time rather than improve flavor. You're paying extra to experience bourbon that prioritizes efficiency over excellence. But Maker's 46 at least uses their own bourbon. The next bottle became pure allocation nightmare. Elijah Craig, 18-year. Heaven Hills Elijah Craig. Small batch is excellent bourbon at $28 to $35. Their 18-year single barrel should represent the distillery's pinnacle, instead at $130 to $160 when you can find it. This became another allocation casualty where scarcity matters more than quality. The bourbon itself is good. 18 years delivers deep oak, dark fruit, and leather complexity. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many barrels at 18 years taste over-oaked. The sweetness fades. Tannins dominate. You're drinking wood-flavored bourbon that peaked years earlier but commands premium prices because the age statement impresses casual buyers. Heaven Hill releases Elijah Craig 18 in tiny quantities, creating instant allocation pressure. Stores distribute it through lotteries. Secondary markets reach $300. Meanwhile, their 12-year small batch delivers 90% of the experience for 1/6 the cost. The math doesn't work unless you're collecting age statements rather than drinking bourbon. When you buy Elijah Craig 18, you're paying $100 for 3 factors: the age statement prestige, the allocation scarcity, the Heaven Hill name. The actual bourbon might not be worth more than $60 to $70 based purely on flavor. That's allocation culture destroying rational pricing. And allocation culture reaches its absolute peak with the next 3 bottles. Blanton's Single Barrel. Blanton's created bourbon bottle collecting culture. 8 horse and jockey stoppers spelling out the brand name. Beautiful bottles. Good single-barrel bourbon from Buffalo Trace. At suggested retail of $60 to $65, this represents fair value. But nobody pays retail anymore. That's the scam. Secondary markets price Blanton's at $150 to $250. Stores hold bottles for preferred customers or bundle them with less desirable whiskey. The allocation game turned decent $60 bourbon into unobtainable luxury. What frustrates industry veterans is watching genuinely good whiskey become inaccessible because of collectible stoppers. The liquid itself is solid. Honey, citrus, oak balance executed well. But blind tastings consistently show Blanton's performs comparably to readily available single barrels costing $40. The horse topper adds $100 to the value. That's not bourbon pricing. That's collectible toy pricing applied to alcohol. Buffalo Trace deliberately restricts Blanton's distribution despite having capacity to produce more. They understand that scarcity creates demand. Consumers fight over bottles. Prices climb. Buffalo Trace's other products benefit from halo effect. Meanwhile, drinkers who just want good bourbon get priced out entirely. When packaging matters more than liquid, everyone loses except the manufacturer. But Blanton's allocation seems reasonable compared to the next catastrophe. Weller Special Reserve. Weller Special Reserve costs $18 to $25 at retail. It's wheated bourbon from Buffalo Trace, sharing mash bill similarities with Pappy Van Winkle. Those facts created absolute market insanity. Weller became poor man's Pappy. Suddenly, $20 bourbon started selling for $75 to $150 on secondary markets. This represents bourbon culture's complete detachment from reality. The whiskey itself is fine, soft wheat sweetness, caramel, vanilla, perfectly acceptable bourbon at actual retail price. At secondary market prices of $100, it's laughable. You're paying $80 extra for bourbon that doesn't outperform Maker's Mark, which sits on shelves everywhere at $30. What drives bartenders and enthusiasts crazy is watching grown adults fight over mediocre wheated bourbon because it's related to Pappy. This isn't bourbon appreciation. This is brand worship detached from actual flavor. Buffalo Trace fuels this madness through calculated scarcity. They could produce more Weller. They choose not to because allocation drives their entire portfolio's desirability. When you pay $100 for Weller Special Reserve, you're not buying bourbon worth $100. You're buying participation in allocation theater. You're funding flippers and store owners who bundle it with garbage whiskey. Most importantly, you're proving that manufactured scarcity works better than actual quality improvement. And if Weller represents allocation madness, the next bottle is allocation's ultimate achievement. Pappy Van Winkle 15-year. Nothing in bourbon generates more theater than Pappy Van Winkle, the most sought-after American whiskey. Lottery systems, waiting lists, secondary prices reaching $2,000 for the 15-year expression. Suggested retail sits around $120. The gap between those numbers represents everything broken about modern bourbon culture. Let's establish facts. Pappy Van Winkle is very good bourbon, 15 years in barrel, wheated mash bill, Buffalo Trace distillation, deep complexity, oak, vanilla, and leather character that rewards attention. At actual retail price of $120, this represents fair value for exceptional wheated bourbon. At secondary prices of $1,000 to $2,000, this is absolute insanity. The Pappy phenomenon transcends whiskey quality entirely. It became the ultimate status symbol. Owning it matters more than drinking it. Customers who finally score a bottle perform appreciation for social media rather than actually experiencing bourbon. Blind tastings consistently show experienced drinkers can't distinguish Pappy from Weller 12 or other Buffalo Trace wheated offerings. What makes Pappy the #1 scam isn't the whiskey itself, it's the ecosystem of allocation corruption, secondary market gouging, and manufactured scarcity that transformed good bourbon into unobtainable mythology. Old Rip Van Winkle Distillery produces tiny amounts. Buffalo Trace bottles it. Distribution favors insiders. Consumers fight for scraps. Behind every bottle of Pappy sold at inflated prices sits a trail of disappointment. Stores that bundled it with mediocre whiskey. Customers who paid rent money for bourbon. Collectors who never opened bottles worth thousands. Meanwhile, exceptional bourbon sits ignored on shelves because it lacks Pappy's mythology. When you chase Pappy at any price above $200, you're not pursuing great bourbon. You're pursuing the idea of great bourbon, and that idea costs way more than the liquid deserves. But bourbon doesn't have to be theater. Some bottles deliver honest value without games. Here are 5 American bourbons actually worth your money. Old Forester 100 Proof. Old Forester is America's oldest continuously produced bourbon brand. Their 100 Proof expression costs $28 to $35 and delivers what $100 bottles promise but fail to provide. This is bourbon built on integrity rather than marketing budget. The liquid hits immediately with brown sugar, toasted oak, and baking spice. At 50% alcohol, it carries weight and warmth without harshness. The finish lingers with vanilla and cinnamon that makes you want another pour. Nothing here feels rushed or compromised. This is patient bourbon making from a distillery that's been perfecting their craft since 1870. What makes Old Forester 100 Proof remarkable is consistency. Every bottle tastes like the last. No single barrel variation, no allocation games, just reliable bourbon that performs identically whether you're in Kentucky or California. Brown-Forman has the resources to cut corners and boost margins. They choose not to. At $30, this outperforms bourbons costing double. It works beautifully in cocktails, holding structure behind mixers. Neat, it delivers enough complexity to satisfy experienced palates. When a distillery with this much history prices bourbon fairly while maintaining quality, that deserves recognition and loyalty. But consistent quality is just the beginning. True value requires boldness. Wild Turkey Simps Viens. At 101 proof, Wild Turkey announces its intentions immediately. This is not bourbon for tourists. This is bourbon in its purest American form. Bold, unapologetic, and built to deliver flavor at any price point. At $22 to $28, this represents the best value in American whiskey. The flavor comes swinging, cherry and cinnamon up front, rich caramel in the middle, oak and heat on the finish. There's bite, but there's also balance. That's the magic of 101. It punches hard without losing manners. Master distiller Jimmy Russell has been making this bourbon for over 60 years. That institutional knowledge shows in every bottle. What separates Wild Turkey 101 from competitors is respect for tradition. While other brands chase trends with honey flavors and cinnamon infusions, Wild Turkey makes bourbon the way bourbon should taste. High proof, rich flavor, no apologies. They've resisted every pressure to water it down or smooth it out for mass appeal. Industry analysts consistently rank Wild Turkey 101 as the best bourbon under $30. Bartenders stock it religiously because it performs in cocktails and satisfies need. When you're spending $25 on bourbon, this is the benchmark every other bottle must beat. Most can't. But bang for buck value reaches new levels with the next bottle. Evan Williams Single Barrel. Heaven Hill's Evan Williams Single Barrel costs $28 to $35 and competes directly with single barrels costing $60 to $70. The vintage date on every bottle shows exact barrel selection. The flavor delivers honey, oak, and baking spice complexity that rewards slow sipping. This is bourbon that proves price and quality don't always correlate. Each barrel varies slightly, creating genuine single-barrel character without the allocation nonsense that plagues other brands. Some lean sweeter, others show more oak. That variation is feature, not flaw. You're experiencing actual barrel selection rather than laboratory-controlled consistency. What makes Evan Williams Single Barrel special is Heaven Hill's refusal to play pricing games. They could easily charge $50 based on the single barrel designation and vintage dating. They choose not to. The quality justifies higher pricing. Their integrity prevents it. That's rare in modern bourbon. Blind tastings consistently rank this alongside Blanton's and other allocated single barrels. The difference? Evan Williams sits on shelves at normal prices while others require hunting and overpaying. When a distillery delivers this much character at this price point, that deserves celebration and support. And if Evan Williams proves single barrels don't require allocation, the next bottle proves age statements don't require luxury pricing. Heaven Hill Bottled in Bond 7-year. Bottled in Bond designation guarantees specific quality standards, 100 proof, single distillery, single season, aged minimum 4 years. Heaven Hill's 7-year bonded expression takes those requirements seriously while pricing it at $17 to $22. This might be the most underrated bourbon in America. 7 years delivers oak maturity without over-extraction. The flavor shows caramel, vanilla, leather, and spice in perfect balance. At 100 proof, it drinks hot initially, but opens beautifully with air or water. The finish lingers with warmth that makes you reach for another sip. For $20, this outperforms bourbons costing 4 times as much. What frustrates bourbon enthusiasts is how Heaven Hill Bottled in Bond sits ignored while people chase allocated mediocrity. This has age statement, it has proof, it has flavor. Everything collectors claim to want, this delivers at prices that don't require second mortgages. The green label doesn't photograph as beautifully as wax-dipped stoppers. The liquid inside out performs almost everything. Heaven Hill could easily raise prices to $35 or $40, and consumers would pay gladly. They maintain fair pricing because their business model doesn't rely on artificial scarcity or luxury positioning. They make bourbon for drinkers, not collectors. When you find integrity like this, you support it. But one bourbon combines everything great bourbon should be while charging honest prices. Old Grandad Sims Cheddarpadsmith. Beam's Old Grandad line includes several expressions. The 114 proof bonded bourbon costs $25 to $32 and delivers what 3-figure bottles promise but rarely achieve. This is high rye bourbon with serious proof, legitimate age, and flavor that competes with anything on the market regardless of price. The 57% alcohol by volume hits hard. Rye spice, oak char, caramel sweetness, and pepper create complexity that demands attention. The mouthfeel is thick and oily. The finish lingers for minutes with warmth and cinnamon. Nothing about this bourbon feels compromised or rushed. Beam took classic high rye recipe, aged it properly, bottled it at serious proof, and priced it fairly. What makes Old Grandad 114 the best value in bourbon is how it outperforms allocated bottles in blind tastings. When experienced drinkers sample this alongside Blanton's, Elijah Craig 18, and other hyped bottles, OGD 114 consistently ranks in top positions. The difference? It costs $30 and sits on shelves everywhere. At 114 proof, this isn't beginner bourbon. It rewards experience and patience. But for drinkers who appreciate bourbon's bold character without paying for mythology and marketing, this represents everything right about American whiskey. Honest production, serious proof, fair pricing, and flavor that justifies every dollar while never asking for more than it's worth. If you ever find yourself reaching for a $70 bottle with a fancy stopper or nautical aging story, ask yourself one question: does it deliver more than Old Grandad 114? The answer is almost always no. This is the benchmark for what bourbon can be when distilleries prioritize drinkers over collectors and quality over hype. Skip the status symbols and buy the bottle that actually tastes like the money you're spending.